Kia ora koutou, welcome back. Welcome everybody back to This Is Our Story on what for me right now is a very lovely, sunny spring Sunday afternoon. Welcome back to you again, Briar. Congratulations for making it.
Hi, everyone.
Anything interesting to report on your side of the Tasman?
No, nothing interesting going on here. Just crap spring weather.
Yes, I do not miss that crap spring weather at all. The one thing I love about Brisbane, for those of you who don't know Brisbane, is that it's very predictable. It's super nice right now, although it's starting to get really hot. So it's going to be a roaster of a summer. But anyway, such boring, shallow weather talk. Let's get straight into it. We are going straight into story time. And the topic of this week's story time, something a little bit sweet and cute, I guess. We were going to talk about some of the animals in our lives from back in the time of growing up on the farm. And animals have always been a big part of both of our lives. And I think growing up, we basically always had pets. From some of our earliest memories always involved some kind of animal. So, Briar, I don't know if you want to start off by talk about our first pets.
Well, obviously I've talked before about horses, and they've always been my biggest love and passion. But yeah, we've had lots of animals, ranging from, like, our uncle used to bring us lambs that mothers had rejected, and we had lots and lots of lambs that we had to bottle feed over the years. We also had
access to a lot of farm animals, which felt very normal for us, right? But so many people have not had anything close to that experience. Because I don't know, you remember it like in Taupo, right? Do you remember that farmland or whatever it's called? You know, where people, not Taupo, anyway, there's a place where all the tourists go to see all the farm animals, and they see the sheep getting shorn, and, you know, they get to see all the little lammies running around, and they love it. And it was, you know, taking all the photos and stuff.
It was so normal for us. Like,
so normal.
Yeah.
It's in Rotorua, next to the luge.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Whereas that stuff, we saw it all the time.
Every spring, we used to get all the lambs. And sometimes we'd have a few at once, and we used to, obviously they get bottle fed every couple of hours. I remember taking my lamb to school because it needed feeding every couple of hours. And we'd just tie it up outside, and my friend had her lambs as well.
I mean, you know, when people make jokes about New Zealand and our attraction.
I
was going to say attraction.
Like attraction to sheep.
Take that back.
You're digging a hole here.
We have a lot of sheep. I will leave it at that.
I'm
always defending New Zealand and our connection with sheep. But, you know, then again, if you lived in the country, it'd be really unusual to not have some sheep in your life at some degree. Anyway, you had one particular lamb, I remember, that you used to take to shows. And what was his name again? Comet, that's right. And what were the competitions that you entered him in?
So I took him to the A&P show, and he was around for a long time, because most of the lambs we had either died or, I don't know, they must have gone back to the farm with our uncle.
Well, all I can say is all of mine died, but, you know, sorry, finish your story first.
Had this one, and one of yours called Llama. They stuck around. There was 3 of them, and I can't remember the third one, but they stuck around for quite a long time to fully grown sheep. And I used to take him to the A&P show, and I got a prize one year for best led lamb. But when you look at the picture from it, he definitely was not playing ball that day. I was yanking his lead around. But because I was
he was a pretty good looking lamb. I mean, he would have made some pretty good chops.
He was cool. But hey, but the morning of the show, I've got a picture of it somewhere. Maybe we'll share it to the podcast Instagram. But I washed him and got the hairdryer out and was blowing and brushing his wool. He loved it, being pampered. And but I was obsessed with horses, right? So I even taught him to jump. So I set up these these jumps. Poor blooming sheep. He had a full coat of wool on, and it was the middle of summer, and I'm teaching him to jump over these jumps, and I remember him panting like he was obviously quite fat too, so he was unfit, fully covered in wool, the poor thing. But
I don't know.
yeah,
Well,
you had
I mean, I
some.
had a few lambs, not the best luck. So I had my first one, and I named him Buster for whatever reason, I do not know. Sounded cute, but he was very sickly because just like if you don't know anything about sheep or farm animals, when a mother gives birth to it, generally they look after them for a little while straight out of the womb. But every now and then a mother will reject one, and I don't know, often those lambs would die just out in the field or whatever. But our uncle wanted to make sure they didn't die, obviously, and what better way than just hand them off to the kids, Briar and I. Anyway, so I had Buster. He didn't last very long. I think maybe a couple of weeks, if that. It was very sad. And then I got a second one, same season, I think, actually.
Yeah, it was.
And named him Buster the Second. And he also only survived about a couple of weeks. And then I had a third one.
Guess what you called it?
Buster the Third.
The cursed names.
And he also died. Yep. Yeah. Anyway, it was very cute. Lambs are very cute, and I do miss that part of farm life, actually being around the farm animals. But at home we had chickens.
Yes.
Mum and dad just love chickens. But even now they have chickens of their own. But yeah, we always had those around, and so fresh eggs, of course. It was really nice. And
we also in the spring had this was you weren't as fussed as I was, but we had calves, and it was our job. Like mum and dad bought them for us to raise, and this was our way of making pocket money. It was our responsibility to feed them, and they were in the pen, and we had to clean out the pen, muck it out, and when they were yearlings, we'd sell them and get the money back.
Although I do have a distinct memory that actually it was mostly Dad who was doing all of the work.
No, I was feeding them, but they were assholes. When we put them out in the paddock, they would just run straight through the fencing, and it would end up being me and Dad chasing them round, trying to get them back in the bloody other side of the tape. I think the electric fence wasn't connected to the mains, and it just wasn't very strong. So
I remember that.
Oh my God, they are stubborn.
They're real dickheads, and I know this after working on the dairy farm.
Yes. And both Dad and I would be running around like trying to tackle them as they run past, and they'd just go the other way. Yeah,
I think we got about $700 each.
Yeah, it was, which is a lot of money now, let alone back then to young teenagers. But yeah, the price per kilo was quite good. So, we learnt to, as most kids growing up on the farm, you don't become so attached that that was going to be the end game. Sell them for meat, and it was good pocket money.
Yeah, I think this is part of farm life that I guess I really appreciate it, because it taught me a lot about just natural life cycles. And
responsibility.
But there's obviously good ways to look after animals as well, and I do know the difference between being a responsible farm animal owner to the ones who mistreat. So we learned those lessons too. But yeah, the other one, we mostly just had cats as well. So we always had cats around, mostly because Mum doesn't like dogs. She's one of the very few people I know on this planet who doesn't like dogs. But I had my first cat, Will Scarlet, who I've mentioned before. But then that's right. So my second cat, we called him Obed. But he was, in all sense of the word, a farm cat, because he had been abandoned on my uncle's sheep farm, and he'd just made a home for himself in the shearing shed. And so we went up so my uncle was like, he had told us about it, and he thought we might like to rescue him. So I don't know if you remember this, Brian, but we drove up to the shearing shed, and then they're just big. He's quite a big cat, a big orange, long-haired, beautiful cat.
Very
just
fluffy.
Bounded out of the shearing shed and just jumped straight in the car. We didn't even have to call him. He just came out and jumped in the car, and we just took him home. And then he just became a part of the furniture.
He was such a lovely cat too. Yeah. So sweet.
Yeah. So I called him Obed, which is a very
It's a biblical name, isn't it?
Yeah.
I recall you choosing a biblical name.
Yes, I did like the old niche names. And we had like a couple of other cats along the way as well. And so, yeah, animals have always been a very big part of our lives. And I think both of us are still very connected with animals.
Mm.
Anyway, I'm sorry, you didn't have anything else to add, Brian, on the animal front?
No. Could be
we get
here
in
all
trouble
day.
for talking over you again.
I've had many horses since then as well. So,
well, because
we've
often
covered
you
that
were
already.
borrowing horses, right? I remember.
Yeah. Mm.
Actually, before we move on, I remember the very memorable story of the horse that escaped.
Well, it's not a very nice story. I had two that escaped actually, but not a very nice story. I had my uncle and auntie had a little pony that they gave me, and I think I only had it for about 3 days, and it was so anxious, and somehow it managed to get out of the paddock. And we used to live on one of the main state highways, State Highway 10, and it got out onto the road in the middle of the night, and somebody hit it in a car, and obviously it died. It bled to death in the ditch. And my uncle,
quite full on, because it wasn't that late at night, because I remember this very clearly, because we had a bunch of people over at the house, and we were all playing a game of Risk together, and we saw all these flashing lights outside. And we're like, oh, what's going on?
You must have been up late, because my memory of it was I was in bed already.
Oh, you were definitely asleep. You only found out about it the next day. But I mean, it was a game of Risk, so of course it was a late night. But we all went out to investigate, thinking it was just an accident. And then, we walked down there and we found, the horse. It was quite a miraculous story in a way, because, if a horse hits a car, like generally the person's a goner, because there's such a big object to get hit. It's pretty horrible. But the horse had hit the car and then run back up and then just fallen off the road. So could have been a lot worse. It was very intense, Brian, for you. I remember the next day. It was
so traumatic. I remember, because we had the 2-storied house, and I remember looking out my bedroom window, and I wasn't allowed out because my uncle came with his like pickup truck, whatever you want to call it, and had to. This is awful. We may have to put a trigger warning, but he. What I remember is that he was walking down the drive with a bloody axe, and blood all over it, and he basically had to chop up my horse to put it to be able to lift it and put it on the back of the truck to take it home for dog meat. Like, it was so traumatic. I will never ever forget that day. Awful. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
That wasn't very nice at all.
No. Where do we go from there?
We'll just put it into tumbleweed. We might as well just jump straight into what we're actually here for.
And only happy stories to come. Okay, so let's jump straight into the episode proper. So just a very quick recap over the last 2 episodes. I guess mostly focusing on my story. We've talked about how the beginning stages of my relationship with my first partner, who I then went on to get married to, and I shared about some of the beginning stages of that traumatic journey and some of the very kind of intense feelings that I had at that time. And we kind of segued a little bit into talking about the beginning stages of Briar's married life journey as well. So I guess we probably covered maybe the first year or first 2 years of both of us being involved in married life. I will be honest, it was quite intense for me. You'll probably hear that in the recording. It was a little bit hard for me to talk about, and I suspect that will continue. It's funny, just as an aside, like when you talk about these things that have been quote unquote buried for years, and you think that they have kind of gone away, even though your brain tells you that they haven't. They still just exist there, just a little bit below the surface. And we all know that all of us are broken, right? It's just a natural part of life. We've all been through a lot of shit, and that becomes a part of who we are. we recraft ourselves based on our experiences in the past, and I have done that, and most of that has been a positive recrafting. But those broken parts still exist, and you can't ever completely heal those things because they are just who I am. So yeah, it's been an interesting couple of weeks as I've been processing bringing up that stuff again, because what I talked about in the episodes itself, that wasn't so traumatic, but it was the connection with the future chapters of my life that are much more fresh, that it's just kind of been bringing that up again. anyway, just a long intro to kind of get back into the stuff. I guess we were just going to pick up the story from where we left off. So I guess that first year after I got married, I was still, I remember I talked about working at Countdown at the supermarket. And then after 6 months of working, I went back to uni to finish off. And what should have been 6 months actually ended up being an extra year to finish off my uni. Just unfortunately how it worked out with papers and stuff. But even now looking back, I'm quite proud of the fact that I went back to finish. I could have walked away and just carried on with my life. But I mean, I guess anybody who knows me well knows that I hate quitting. And I don't think the perfectionist side of me could ever have not gone back and finished my degree. But I went back, finished my teaching degree, and got to the end and just really super, super lost. Like I came out of university
with a whole lot of debt.
A whole lot of debt, because I can't remember if I've mentioned this before, but so I wasn't financially supported by mum and dad. I don't really resent them for that. I don't really know what their money situation was. We didn't really talk about money much with mum and dad, but I didn't really know how to manage finances. So that meant that I was getting a weekly allowance from the government, an allowance being part of a student loan. I was getting course-related costs of $1,000 per semester, and also on top of that, of course, paying for all my tuition. And so by the time I left uni, I was probably about 30 to 40 grand in debt. And that was over like 3.5 to 4 years of study. That didn't really feature on my radar, because when you're first out of uni, you don't want to think about it. You pretend it doesn't exist. But came out, was like, shit, I am not ready to be a teacher. I don't know what it was, but I was just scared of being an adult, I think, of being that responsible one, of being in this really kind of predictable.
Still kind of a kid yourself to then having to be teaching.
Yeah, and I just felt it. And I think this is definitely a part of me, of who I am. Not so much now, I feel a lot more settled in myself, but that fear of feeling like I would be stuck in one place doing one thing potentially for the rest of my life. That fear of settling. In fact, even now I use the word settle and it's like, I cringe a little bit. And so when I came out of uni, I just super, super lost. And I went straight into like a really random job, like delivering for Noel Leeming, which is kind of like Harvey Norman, or I can't really think of another example, but delivering TVs and fridges and such and setting them up. So as an academic person, kind of ready, quote unquote, ready for big things, and then just settling for some random kill time job. I think that was a real adjustment for me. And so that I kind of was just floating. I was just killing time at that stage. So I graduated 2006. I must have been around about 23, 24, something around that time. And I worked there for a year, 2 years. And I think that whole time I was just desperate to see the world. And as I've mentioned before, a number of times, obsessed with adventure, right? And nothing about my life in Tauranga at the time that predictable. I say predictable, but my married life is anything but predictable. But the idea of just being in that one place, doing a boring job, just going through the motions, that was like a nightmare. That was a nightmare for me, and I just really, really wanted to get out. And it was about this time that I started lobbying my partner to let us move or leave New Zealand, or consider options about going to other countries. And like, I think I probably had lots of ideas about places that I wanted to go or wanted to live, but I think it seemed to me that Australia was just the easiest option, because knowing what my partner was like in terms of something safe and stable, Australia was going to be the easiest option for her. And I think that was the only thing she was actually willing to compromise on, was going to Australia, because it wasn't too far away. And I think at this time by the time we came to making this decision to leave, you had just left. And so that was probably something that was definitely in the mix. The fact that you had got to leave New Zealand and I didn't definitely bothered me at the time. But I mean, alongside all of this, I was really invested in church life as well. Oh, shit, I just remembered, actually. I tried to leave Tauranga in those first couple of years after uni. I was actually, I can't believe I forgot this. I was going to go to police college. That's right. I was like, shit, I really want to do something that has a bigger purpose to it. And I was all set on going to police college in Wellington. We even, at our church at the time, we told everybody we were leaving, and we were all set basically to kind of pack up and go. We hadn't actually done the packing yet, but we had a goodbye party. And
did you?
Yeah. I don't even remember what year this was. This must have been 2007, maybe 2008. I just remember having a conversation with my partner, and I don't know what it was. She wasn't that comfortable with the idea of going, or maybe it was a mutual decision. Well, at least it felt like a mutual decision. And it just, I don't know, it just died, and we had to come back and then tell everybody who had decided to stay.
Awkward.
And it was actually awkward. Like, people were like, oh, so you're not going then? We just had to continue like doing life in Tauranga with the same church people and everything, and just pretend that we never said we were about to leave. So weird. But yeah, I was very involved in church at this time. So I was in the youth ministry, so part of an intermediate outreach group, intermediate youth one, working with vulnerable youth, and I was really passionate about that, and really, like, it was just a lot of fun, but also gave me an opportunity to do something that made me feel like I was giving back to the world. But at the same time, it was I think a distraction from stuff at home, because it gave me another night to get out of home. So I got to go out every Friday, and it was tiring. I was definitely tired back then, because, working and serving, as we call it in church life, it's hard. I don't know, there's a lot to unpack there. Not really the appropriate time, I think, in talking about this to unpack.
Well, also constantly managing things at home too.
Yeah.
The predictability of it, that's exhausting in itself.
Yeah, and in terms of the early marriage years, I can't say I really remember a lot of it, that part. I do. One other feature of those first couple of years was that we moved around about 3 or 4 times, I think, from 2005 to 2009. I think we probably moved 5 times. There was always some kind of and I think it wasn't necessarily me that was making those decisions. No surprise there, I guess. So, it was always, we're too far away from town, or this place just doesn't feel comfortable enough, or, I just want an extra bedroom, or this is not nice enough. There was always an excuse for moving to another house. And that was quite stressful, to say the least, because there was never a chance for us to just breathe and just get used to life together.
Maybe that was a reflection on, like how things are going, never feeling settled, or, trying to figure out the missing piece in the puzzle. And maybe it was like, it's the house, it's the place we're at. We just don't feel at home here. But maybe that's not what it was.
Well, I mean, I suppose in hindsight, that's probably what it was for me. But for me, it was got to get out of the country. But for her, it was got to be in a new, we just need the comfortable space. There's got to be a perfect house out there for us, a place where we can feel truly at home. And as I've shared in the last episode, I talked about the fact that she needed stability and predictability. And I think that's definitely a part of it. Having an environment that was just a bit easier to control, a bit more comfortable, you know. And when you're that way inclined, unless you deal with those issues, you're always constantly going to be trying to fix them in some way, right? You never run away from your problems. As I found out when I ran away to Australia, the problem actually came with me. So I guess for me, I don't know, I convinced her that, okay, maybe let's go to Australia, let's go to Sydney. And I think probably a part of that decision was church related. We had a couple of friends in Sydney, or my best man lived there, so that would have been part of it, but also the opportunity to go to Hillsong as well, Hillsong Church, which many people will know of, which our church was kind of became a copycat of Hillsong, and a lot of other churches in New Zealand were the same. At that stage, Hillsong was booming, and it was before they went global, but they were still very influential in the church world, the Pentecostal church world. And why wouldn't I want to go to a place that where I actually got to go and experience Hillsong for real, you know, on my own terms rather than just the copycat version? It was very exciting, actually, the thought of going to this mega church and seeing and hearing the best music, and yeah, that was pretty cool.
So but I mean, a bit before go.
Yeah. So we did attend. So I mean, skipping ahead a little bit, we lived in Sydney for a year, and we attended Hillsong for that whole year. Actually, there's more stuff to talk about that, but I just don't want to dominate too much. So I'm just going to flick the mic back over to you, Brian. So what was going on for you in those first few years after you got married?
Pretty non-eventful, to be honest. I was working, doing casual jobs, and then I got a full-time job at a daycare in Bethlehem, and I was there up until until we decided to leave. And I can't remember the decision process behind it. Probably pretty similar. I just really wanted to travel, and we decided that Perth was a good place to go. I had family there that could sort of help set us up, and
was that an attraction though? Because you stayed in contact with Auntie?
Loosely, but it was probably more that, you know, the idea of having support while we got ourselves set up was appealing. But probably the main appeal was, so when we left, it was middle of 2008, and it was right when the recession hit New Zealand, and Tauranga was known as $10 Tauranga. Like, there was no money to be made. But at the same time, in Perth, the mining industry, it was just absolutely booming, and there was a lot of money in Perth.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they were trying to draw people in to the city, because actually the city was underpopulated at the time, because everyone would go to the mines, which was out of Perth. So we were like, let's do it. Let's go make some money. And yeah, that was July 2008, and we didn't really have anything in New Zealand stopping us, really. Like, my partner, his family was here and he was close with them, but they were like, you know, go for it. And so we ended up spending 6 months there.
How did you feel about, like, what were your feelings? I don't know if you remember this, but before heading off into the big wide world?
Well, just before we left was when we'd stopped going to church. Like, we'd been kicked out of that cell group. So we were kind of disconnecting ourselves from the people we knew. And so we were just ready to go. We were like, whatever. I don't remember having a feeling of emotional attachment to Tauranga or to people there. We did have a farewell dinner, and some of my old friends from school came down, and that
Did
was
I,
probably.
did I go to that? I don't remember.
It was very low key, probably. It was very low key. We literally just had dinner at a restaurant with some people. And then when we left, it was quite weird because for the first time ever, we didn't feel like we had eyes on us, from our parents, from the church people. There was no, it was starting completely afresh and
There's something
exploring new
very
place.
freeing about that, right?
Oh, totally.
Because,
it was.
I mean, when you first left home, when we first left home, there was a sense of freedom, but at the same time, it came with
not fully.
Yeah, it came with some attachment to something, with still some rules attached, right, or expectations.
And our parents had set us up with families and other people to keep an eye on us, right? Whereas this was like, fully adulting and going out into the big wide world. And I'd been once before to Perth when I was 15, but this was such a big deal. And we were living with our auntie, mum's sister, who, well, we won't go into it, but their relationship's a little bit weird, but
understatement.
Yeah. So we were staying with them, and there was definitely some awkward moments there. But we used to leave the house and go exploring, and it was a great 6 months. But we kind of also went off the rails a little bit. It was our first time we experienced, going out and getting drunk and getting in with crowds of people that we definitely would not have associated with in a past life in New Zealand.
I mean, how did you meet them?
Mostly through work.
So, what was your work situation?
So in New Zealand, when I trained, I became a qualified nanny, but in Australia, my qualification meant that I was a qualified teacher, which meant I was getting huge amounts of money for a qualification that I don't know how that worked, but I think I was getting something like $15 more an hour than I was in New Zealand. Like, we were like, holy moly. And then my partner, who was a cabinet maker, got a good job. I can't remember how much more he was earning, but I remember when he went for the interview and they said, oh, you'll be starting on this. Hopefully that's okay. He had to sort of act as if that was like, he was totally blown out of his mind how much they were offering compared to what he was getting in New Zealand, because it was just huge.
I mean, it's no surprise that so many Kiwis leave New Zealand, right?
Totally. Yeah. And so that was just like, wow, this is, it was so exciting. We were earning big bucks, and Perth isn't a cheap place to live, but the money makes it totally doable.
I mean, there's all these bars and things there as well, right? Restaurants and I've never been to Perth, but that's what I've been told.
Yeah, so we lived out of the city in a place called Freo or Fremantle. So we had to catch a train to go into the city, but it's weird because back then Perth, it was so empty. Like, there seemed hardly any people in the city. Beautiful city, so clean, and it's got the river running through it. So if you haven't been before, it's definitely a place I'd recommend going. And we arrived in winter, but it was still 25 degrees. It was just the whole time we were there, it was just this is so cool. So we were going to parties every weekend and getting messed up. And I think it was just because it's like when you first leave home. Yeah, but so the first drink I had, I did have a drink in New Zealand, and I was 21 when it was my first drink, but this was just next level, and it was just wowee.
It's like a second coming of age.
I still have a memory, right, of it was the, what do you call it, the Grand National Final, the AFL
Grand Final,
final, which is a big deal in Australia. And these people that we knew, mostly through my partner's work, they'd arranged to do a champagne breakfast. And we went round, and there was no breakfast. No one had brought any breakfast or
That's
ordered
not-
any food.
That's a champagne breakfast.
Yeah, so literally people had already started drinking. I think we met up with them at like 9 a.m. and we were drinking from 9 a.m. till 3 a.m. the next day.
Jesus.
And I'd bought a 1 liter bottle of vodka, and I was supposed to be sharing it with someone else. I didn't share it. I had the whole thing, and I ended up blacking out and vomiting all over our friend's white sofa. And having to be looked at. That hangover lasted 3 days. No word of a lie. 3 days. It was awful. And
so how did you reconcile? Like, you must have had some sense of how different this life was. How did you reconcile those two different sides of you? Or was this new version of you, was that you? Like,
I think I didn't sort of have a conscience about it. I literally was just too wrapped up in this feeling of freedom, and nobody had to know, like our parents didn't know that I was getting wasted every weekend, or, that we weren't going to church. And it was just like, quietly, I'm fucking loving this new life and this new me. And it was just, like most normal teenagers would do that when they leave home, right? They sort of go out and experience the world in that sense. And I hadn't done that before. So this was just like a totally different version of myself. And I was like, this is so much fun. I mean, the hangovers weren't fun, but it was just something I had to do. I just had to sort of get that out of my system.
Well, I mean, if I could switch back very quickly to my side, that I never experienced that. So, and to be honest, I had no idea you were going through this as well. I mean, obviously I knew later on, but I didn't go through this kind of new coming of age because I was having a completely different life, quote unquote, maturing in the faith in church life, where I was in a church that had just started. I remember actually they had a meeting about the church's position on drinking, and all of a sudden it was the decision that they'd reached was that it was okay for leaders to drink, but obviously within moderation.
How they came to that conclusion. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously setting a good role model was very important, but we weren't against the idea of drinking itself. And so people started drinking, but I still felt like it wasn't, I didn't feel it was right for me, because I think we've talked about how I had this very strong moral code, which I was unable to break, but that was never a negative thing for me.
Our parents never ever drank. Like, there was
no
like
alcohol in our house.
Zero, like nothing. We never saw that.
We grew up with a very negative perception of alcohol. Mum and dad openly would say negative things about people who are drunk, or even just seeing someone drunk on the street. It's like something that was actually unsafe. And so I was always afraid of I didn't want to do that myself, but then I also didn't want to really associate with people who would get drunk. And even though I would never say it, I did definitely judge people who did go out and drink. And I think probably if I'd known about your lifestyle, I definitely would have felt the same way towards you as well at that time.
But that's what was so good about being there, was there was no judgmental eyes on us. We could literally just do what we wanted.
Yeah. I mean, and I can't really say that I missed out on that because I didn't know what I was missing. But I do remember very clearly there was a sermon that I heard at that church where one of the speakers, the title of the sermon was "The Microphone is Always On." And this stayed with me basically forever. Even now, the fact I still remember is crazy. Yeah. But it just typifies this certain brand of Christianity, that God is always watching, or people are always watching. And you can interpret it however your brain tells you to interpret it. And so basically I was always going around feeling like somebody was watching, and I had to be extra, extra careful with the way I conducted myself. And so therefore I was never going to get myself in a compromising position.
I guess because you were also one of the leaders with the youth, you are very aware of that too. Setting an example. And
yeah, so to be honest, I have no idea when I had my first drink. obviously wasn't a big deal. I know I drank wine every now and then, but very little. I wasn't enamored with it. I didn't feel like I needed it. And I think I was quite proud of that too. And I do remember being someone who would tell other people that I didn't need alcohol. I didn't need to drink to get drunk. And I was a bit high and mighty about it, seeing myself as better than those who did. Well, yeah. Anyway, so, I mean, obviously 6 months, what happened there? Because I'm not fully across the details of what happened with that. Was it more to do with the family dynamic stuff? Or?
So we were there, for 6 months. I think we had planned on staying longer to earn money, but
I mean, 6 months was pretty short. It must have gone really quickly.
Yeah, and we did. While we were there, we sort of explored around Perth. We went to Rottnest Island and had a good time, and then I kind of decided I wanted to be in the UK for Christmas, and even though we had been earning good money, we still had no money, I guess, because the more you earn, the more you spend. So we actually ended up, it was quite a stressful time. We had a falling out with my auntie who we were living with, and I don't know what was going on at the time. Maybe she was going through menopause or something, but she just turned horrible. We won't delve into that. But so we wanted to get out of there, and we couldn't find a rental for whatever reason. And so we decided we'd just go to the UK, which was always our long-term plan because my partner's sister lived there. But we weren't planning on doing it so soon. So we had to go through the visa process, and that, if you've done that before, it's incredibly stressful. And we'd booked our flights, but our visas hadn't come through. And if I remember,
how were you getting your? So you did the
so
ancestry visa.
Yeah, so the visa I went for was the ancestry visa because our grandfather, Dad's dad, was Scottish, so it meant that I could go for ancestry visa, which was a 5-year long visa. And I feel like we may have missed, like we hadn't got our passports back or something in time, so we had to change our flights or something. Oh man, it was stressful. And we were we'd moved out of my auntie's place to a colleague who I worked with just because it was temporary. She was like, don't worry, I'll help you out. And so we were there for a while. So we were very aware that we didn't want to outstay our welcome. And I think our visas came through like the day before our flight or something. Far out, it was stressful. And the day we left Perth, it was 40 degrees Celsius, and we flew to the UK and landed in London where it was 0 degrees, like the week before Christmas. And yeah, that was the start of a whole other time of my life.
Yeah.
So
what year was that you arrived?
So that was the end of 2008 that we arrived in London.
Yeah. Okay. But we just like switch back. I'm very aware of how long we've been talking already. Just to kind of switch back to my side. So that was end of 2008. So I hadn't even left yet. And so I think hearing like the adventures that you'd had, even though we weren't really talking all that much, I was obviously aware of where you were. And then the fact that you ended up in the UK, I think my whole life had always wanted to live in the UK, just based on all the books I'd read. It was just felt like the center of the world. It was, and the fact I was obsessed with history. Yeah. And I'd always wanted to be in the center of that. And I think I definitely did want to move there, but we ended up in Sydney based on the fact that my partner didn't want to go so far, but it was better than nothing, right? So we ended up in Sydney. I kind of similar to you, but a different way. It felt very, very freeing to be away from New Zealand. And I remember that thrill of being somewhere new. And, I've already mentioned how often I've moved. And I think every time I get that same thrill. And it's actually, I've had to kind of teach myself that actually you can get addicted to that thrill.
Absolutely.
And although it's cool to experience, it's not necessarily healthy. Anyway, it was the first time I felt it, and it felt amazing. And basically when I left, I was like, I'm never going back. New Zealand represented quiet life, predictable, quote unquote boring. And I was like, I'm done. I'll go back and visit maybe every now and then, but I'm out. It just represented rules and restrictions, I guess. But at the same time, as it would have been obvious from what we've talked about already, my home life was like I took that with me. I couldn't escape that. And so I was never fully comfortable in myself in this new environment. I wanted to set myself free a little bit and experience it in the way that I wanted to, but couldn't. That first year anyway, we arrived in Sydney. Money disappeared really quickly. That's what I found out. One of the first lessons was, doesn't matter how much money you've got when you move, it disappears really quickly after, trying to find a house and then trying to get it. You had to buy a car, and cars are expensive, and it took me quite a while to get a job. I still didn't want to be a teacher. I was a bit too intimidated with the idea of getting into teaching again. Eventually, I ended up in a warehouse again, working as a labourer in a warehouse for Baby Kingdom. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
It was a place called Baby Kingdom. So actually I know stuff about babies' toys and furniture and things, which is just one of the really many random skill sets I picked up along the way. But at this time we joined Hillsong Church, and it was really exciting to be involved in Hillsong. If you're not aware, it's even back then, before it went global, it was huge. And, they would have multiple services on a Sunday, thousands of people attending. The music is amazing. And I can't really think of a parallel, but
there isn't
the idea of, obviously I was in music already, doing a lot of music back in my home church. But now I was in the place where all this music was created that I kind of idealized. We'd never say that in church circles, of course. You would say, oh, these guys are so anointed, and it's such an amazing opportunity to be in a place.
Word, anointed. I forgot about that word.
Yeah. Anyway, I did actually go for an audition to play in the Hillsong band, and I don't really remember what happened there, but I don't know. I just didn't pursue it. I can't really remember why, but. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on that. But we found Hillsong, my partner and I found it quite hard because it was so large. Is it cool to be a part of it? But it was really hard to make friends. There's just too many people.
Big. Yeah.
It was just huge. How do you make a small community of friends in a place as thousands of people are attending?
Where nobody even notices a new person arriving.
Yeah. And we did make some friends eventually, some Norwegian friends, and they were great. And that was through a small group type scenario, and it was cool to meet people from different cultures and backgrounds, because Hillsong attracts people from all over the world. They come there to study, and I actually attended a few theology classes there just for fun. That's the kind of person I was, because I was academic, right? I wasn't getting any kind of brain exercise working in a warehouse, and I just kind of really wanted to keep learning and stuff. And I think this is actually when I started being exposed to different theology and things. There was one particular professor who did come up. He had some really alternative ideas, theological ideas, which really opened up my eyes to, and I really started questioning some of the stuff that I'd been taught from my conservative background, where, things like, I remember in the old days of original church preachers saying, if the Bible says it, I believe it. And there was no.
So this was through church,
yeah, so the School of Theology, I can't remember what they call it. Hillsong College is what it's called.
Oh, okay.
And I just went along because I had friends who were attending, who were part of that, and just as a guest. People thought that was wild, that I would just go to a lecture for fun. But, I was hearing questions about people who were saying that perhaps, literal creation stories weren't accurate, and, maybe there was other ways of explaining where we came from. And that was I'd always been questioning stuff, but very privately and very low key. So now all of a sudden I was being exposed to different ideas, different ways of viewing God, and different ways of viewing people and the relationship between people and God. So there was a really key time in my life from that aspect. Being in Sydney, I didn't really enjoy Sydney, to be honest. We were there for a full year, never felt like we could completely settle in. Everyone just felt so busy all the time, and it's very money focused or work focused. Everyone just seems to be slogging away in the ant race. Rat race, I should say. What did I say? Ant race. I mean, ants are very busy, but
you can edit that out.
So just to kind of speed up a little bit, I'm just very aware of how long we've been talking, but it was a really interesting experience that I had in terms of relationship between these new friends and between my partner and I, that in hindsight, now I realize that they had become aware of the very kind of intense dynamics between my partner and I. And there was a time where my partner and I, we went back to New Zealand for a visit, and we took these guys with us to show them around. And there was just a couple of moments on that trip where they looked extremely uncomfortable because, as per usual, our disagreements had become very public. Or when I say disagreements, I mean my partner's expectations and outbursts were quite uncomfortable and public. And there was a time where she really wanted to show these people our home church for some reason around Tauranga, and they weren't all that keen, and she was pressuring me to get them to leave and come to see so we could show them around our church. And it was really uncomfortable. I could see they didn't want to go, and so I didn't want to talk to them, but my partner was saying, oh, go and talk to them. And then she got really mad and like pulled my hair, and it was firstly really, really embarrassing. I do remember that very clearly, the embarrassment, but then also like really fucking intense. Yeah, they were obviously really awkward. They never talked about it, but I could see the discomfort in the way that they reacted towards us. In a way, fast forward, after being in Sydney almost a year, we decided to move down to Melbourne. And I can't really remember the reason why, but I suppose it was kind of obvious. Sydney wasn't really for us. We went and visited Melbourne and really liked it. We just really liked the vibe there. And my partner she went for an interview for a school, a teaching job there, and it went really well. And it just felt like it was time for us to move on. But then I just remember telling our friends that we were leaving Sydney, and my partner had walked away. They quietly said to me, are you sure you want to go? Just want to check, because you don't have to go if you don't want to, right? And at the time I was like, oh no, it's fine. No, I'm good. I want to go. But now, looking back, that was the first, I kid you not, the first time someone had ever suggested that things might not be okay between my partner and I. Mm. And I think the only time, if I just skip forward a little bit, I think it's the only time that I think someone has ever overtly said something that suggested that things might not be okay with our relationship. So that's
brave of them to approach you, considering you'd only known them a year. Yep. Or less, to approach you and ask you, are you okay, basically?
Yeah. So I respect them for that, but also like really sad that no one else, there was no follow-up. I don't feel any bitterness towards them, but we just carried on with our lives. And to be honest, things got tougher from this point on. I guess, we've almost been talking for an hour now. So I probably we'll pause it now, and we'll carry this story on in our next episode, where I'll be talking about moving to Melbourne, and Bri will talk more about your journey in London, where things got a little bit messy for you as well. And this is where things, we're still in our mid-20s here, but this is where things kind of heated up a little bit in terms of our personal lives. And we didn't have much to do with each other at this time, but, soon after this, we kind of came together again, and it was quite a pivotal moment for both of us. So we'll cover that in our next episode. But yeah, thanks for following our story. And we hope that, it is getting a little bit heavy, but it's good for us, for Brian and I, to help process together. But I'm hoping that it's helping anybody out there who's been through similar trauma to, I hope it's not being too triggering, basically is what I'm trying to say. But I hope it's being healthy. I don't know if you anything you want to say to sign off, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, if you are going through it, you're not alone, and
Yeah.
reach out to people. If the village around you,
Yeah.
there
And
will
if
be
you
people
see
that
this,
notice.
yeah, and I think if you are the person that notices, if you are in a position to say something, please, for the love of God and for the love of that person, if you really do cherish that person, just say something. We have a big "Are you okay?" campaign here in Australia, and sometimes that's all it is. That simple question. And that's how I guess that's how I leave this episode. But yeah. Anyway, tune in next time where we get even deeper. Woohoo! All right. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.